He was abandoned, unwanted, and forgotten by everyone, a child left to face the world alone. No one remembered his birthday. No one cared if he ate or slept. No one ever called his name with love. To most people, he was nothing more than a burden. An orphan, invisible in the crowd, destined to live and die without leaving a mark. The whispers followed him everywhere. He has no family. He'll never amount to anything. Some children avoided him at school as if being parentless was a disease they could catch. Others mocked him outright, laughing at his torn clothes, his empty lunchbox, his silence that carried more weight than words ever could. Even adults, the ones who should have shown kindness, looked at him with pity at best and disgust at worst. To them, he was a problem they didn't want to solve. A boy who didn't belong anywhere, and yet, behind those tired eyes, behind the hunger and the loneliness, there lived a spark. It was small, fragile, almost invisible, but it was there. A spark of defiance, a quiet promise whispered into the night. I may have nothing now, but one day they will remember me. This is not just the story of rejection. This is the story of a transformation so powerful, so unexpected, that it would one day leave entire nations in awe. The boy they ignored, the orphan they laughed at, would rise so high that the very same world which dismissed him would turn its eyes toward him, stunned, unable to look away. Because sometimes, life hides its greatest warriors in the shadows of suffering. Sometimes the stone that is thrown away becomes the cornerstone, and sometimes the orphan no one wants carries within him the strength to shock the entire world. But how? How does a child with no family, no money, and no support find the courage to keep going? How does he turn his pain into power, his rejection into resilience? How does he transform from an unwanted boy into a figure the world cannot forget? That is the journey you are about to witness, and a journey of heartbreak, struggle, survival, and ultimately triumph. If the world had abandoned you, would you rise to forgive it or rise to conquer it? He grew up in a place where love was scarce and hope was even rarer. The orphanage was a crumbling building on the edge of the village, peeling walls, leaking roofs, and beds so hard they felt like punishment. To the world outside, it was a shelter, a place where abandoned children were given food and a roof. But to him, it was a reminder every single day that he had been unwanted from the very beginning. Every few months, wealthy families, childless couples, or strangers from distant towns would arrive at the orphanage gates. The children would polish their shoes, brush their hair, and line up like objects on display. Each one secretly prayed to be chosen. One by one, names would be called. Some left with smiling faces, clutching the hands of their new parents. But his name was never called. He would watch silent as another child walked out the door to a new life while he was left behind, again and again. Each time he asked himself the same question. Why not me? The whispers began among the caretakers. He's too quiet, too serious. Others muttered, families want children who smile, not one who carries sadness in his eyes. Some even claimed he was cursed, that there was something about him that kept people away. The other children noticed. They teased him. See, nobody wants you. You'll stay here forever. Even beggars on the street have families. You don't. Each word cut deeper than any wound. At night, when the lights were off and the laughter of the adopted children faded from memory, he would curl up on his thin blanket and stare at the ceiling. His chest ached with loneliness. He had no mother to tuck him in, no father to tell him stories, no one to call his own. But in that silence, he made a vow. If no one wants me, I will want myself. If no one believes in me, I will believe in myself. By the time he was old enough to run errands, the orphanage began sending him into the village to fetch supplies or work small tasks. That was when he first tasted the cruelty of the outside world. Villagers would point at him and whisper, "That's the orphan boy." Some children refused to play with him. Others mocked him openly. "Careful, don't touch him. He has no parents. Maybe he's cursed." At the market, shopkeepers gave him the worst scraps, the bruised fruits or stale bread. They assumed he didn't deserve better. He heard the mutters behind his back. "Poor child, but he'll never amount to anything. He'll grow up to be a beggar, just watch." Each word was like a stone thrown at his heart. He wanted to scream, to prove them wrong, but he swallowed the pain. He walked with lowered eyes, but inside, a fire slowly began to burn. One of the hardest days came when his closest friend at the orphanage, a boy who shared his blanket on cold nights, was chosen by a family. The boy left with shining shoes, a new haircut, and tears of joy. Before leaving, he hugged him tightly and whispered, "I'll never forget you." But weeks later, when he saw that same boy in the market with his new parents, the boy pretended not to know him. The shame of being recognized as an orphan was too heavy. He stood frozen, watching as his only friend walked away without a glance. That was the day he truly understood. In the eyes of the world, he was alone. Yet, for all the rejection, something strange happened inside him. Instead of breaking, his spirit began to harden. Like a sword in fire, the more he was tested, the stronger he became. He learned to endure hunger without complaint. He learned to fight back tears when mocked. He learned to push himself when everyone else had given up on him. And in the quiet moments when no one was watching, he dreamed. He dreamed not of toys or sweets, but of a future where he would stand tall. A future where the very people who pitied him would one day whisper his name with respect. They thought he was empty. They thought he was broken. But inside that lonely boy, a flame was burning. A flame no one could see. Yet one day it would light up the world. The orphanage records would always list him as unwanted, unchosen, forgotten. The villagers' voices would always call him useless, cursed, doomed. But destiny was already preparing him for something greater. Because rejection does not destroy everyone. For some it becomes fuel. For some it becomes the very reason they rise. And this boy, the orphan no one wanted, was carrying within him a power greater than pity, greater than cruelty, greater than the chains of his past. He did not know it yet. Neither did the villagers. But the day would come when this forgotten boy would no longer beg for acceptance. Instead, the world would look to him in awe. When he finally outgrew the orphanage, there was no farewell party, no family to guide him into adulthood, no hand holding his as he stepped out into the world. He simply left, a small bundle of clothes over his shoulder, a pair of worn-out shoes, and a heart carrying both fear and fierce determination. The streets became his new home. The sky was his roof, and survival became his daily battle. At first, he wandered through the village and nearby towns looking for any way to earn a meal. He swept shop floors, carried sacks for merchants, and cleaned animal stalls. Some days a kind soul would toss him a coin or a leftover piece of bread. Other days he worked until his body ached, only to be told, "Come back tomorrow, boy. Today we have nothing for you." He learned to live on little, a scrap of bread, a bowl of thin porridge, sometimes just water to quiet the growl of his stomach. Hunger became a constant companion, a shadow that followed him everywhere. Yet, despite his poverty, he never resorted to stealing. Others in his situation picked pockets or snatched food from stalls, but he held on to a quiet dignity. "If I take what is not mine," he told himself, "then I will truly be what they say I am, cursed and useless. No, I will earn every crumb." But the world was rarely kind to someone like him. Older boys mocked him for his ragged clothes and sunken cheeks. Shopkeepers shouted at him if he lingered too long. Once, when he was caught staring too long at food he could not afford, a vendor shoved him into the dirt and barked, "Get away, orphan! Go starve somewhere else." He picked himself up, brushed the dust from his face, and walked away without a word. The humiliation burned, but he carried it in silence. Sometimes laughter followed him down the street. "Look at him. He thinks he's a man, but he's nothing but a stray dog." These words stung more than hunger, but he swallowed them. Inside, his spirit whispered, "Endure. One day they will eat their words." Nights were the hardest. Without a bed or shelter, he slept wherever he could, under trees, on doorsteps, inside abandoned sheds. The cold bit into his bones, the darkness wrapped him in fear. Sometimes he would press his hands against his empty stomach, wishing it would stop aching. But even in those nights, he dreamed. Lying on the hard ground, he closed his eyes and imagined a different life. He saw himself walking proudly, dressed not in rags but in clothes that commanded respect. He saw himself speaking and crowds listening. He saw himself building something that no one could ever take away. They kept him alive when hunger and hopelessness threatened to break him. Though life was harsh, he never let bitterness consume him. If another street child had no food, he shared what little he had. If an old woman dropped her basket, he rushed to pick it up. People were surprised by his manners, by the quiet strength in his eyes. One day, after carrying heavy water jars for a stranger, the woman pressed a coin into his hand. "You are not like the others," she said softly. "There is something different about you." He held that coin tightly, not just for its value, but for the words. For the first time, someone had seen him as more than an orphan. Despite his lack of schooling, he was sharp. He watched people carefully. How merchants bargained, how leaders gave orders, how workers solved problems. He listened to conversations in the market and memorized words he didn't understand, repeating them later to himself until they made sense. Sometimes he sneaked into the back of classrooms or stood outside windows just to hear lessons. Teachers shooed him away, but he always returned. He hungered for knowledge as much as he hungered for food. Villagers began to notice. That orphan, he's clever. He learns quickly. But still no one offered him a chance. There were days when despair nearly swallowed him. Days when he asked the sky, why was I even born? Why must I suffer alone? Once, after going 2 full days without food, he sat by the roadside and wept quietly. He was ready to give up, to let fate crush him. But then he remembered the vow he made as a child. If no one believes in me, I will believe in myself. He wiped his tears, stood up, and forced himself to keep walking. Step by step he moved forward. Step by step he refused to die defeated. Each hardship carved something new inside him. Hunger taught him discipline. Rejection taught him patience. Loneliness taught him resilience. And work, and no matter how small or humiliating, taught him that dignity is never about wealth but about effort. The villagers who mocked him saw only a boy in rags. But in truth, life was shaping him into something greater, like a diamond being formed in the crushing dark. One evening, after finishing a long day of carrying firewood for pennies, he walked past the village square. A crowd had gathered to hear a traveling speaker, a man who spoke with power and authority. The orphan stood at the edge listening. The speaker's words lit something inside him. For the first time he realized, voices could move people, words could change lives. And in that moment he whispered to himself, one day I will stand where that man stands. One day I will speak and they will listen. It was a small moment, unnoticed by anyone else, but it was the spark of destiny. They thought he was just surviving. They thought he was just another forgotten orphan, scraping by with scraps. But every insult, every hunger, every night under the cold sky was preparing him to rise, preparing him to shock the very world that once pitied him. The boy had learned to carry hunger in silence, to swallow insults without protest, and to live day by day with nothing but determination keeping him alive. But even the strongest hearts sometimes need a single spark, a hand reaching out in the darkness to ignite the flame of destiny. And one day, that spark came. It happened in the most ordinary of places, the village square. He was there, sweeping dust for a shopkeeper who had agreed to pay him with leftover bread. As he worked, he noticed a man passing by, older, dressed modestly, but with a calm presence that seemed to command quiet respect. The man paused. His eyes lingered on the boy, not with pity, but with curiosity. "Boy," he asked gently, "how old are you?" The orphan straightened, startled. Few ever bothered to speak to him beyond orders or insults. I think I'm 13, he replied, unsure of his exact age. The man studied him for a moment. "Do you go to school?" The boy lowered his head. "No, sir, I work. School is for children who have families." For reasons he could not explain, those words struck the man deeply. The man left without saying more, but the next day he returned. This time he carried something under his arm. A book, its cover worn but its pages intact. He held it out. "Take this," he said. The boy blinked, confused. "For me?" "Yes, it's not much. But inside here are treasures far greater than coins. Read it, learn from it." The boy hesitated. He could barely read. Yet he accepted the book with trembling hands, holding it as though it were gold. For the first time in his life, someone had given him a gift, not out of pity, but out of belief. That night, though his stomach ached with hunger, his heart was full. He opened the book under the dim glow of a borrowed candle stub. The words were strange, hard to understand, but he traced them slowly with his finger, repeating them until they began to take shape. Every night thereafter he read. He stumbled, struggled, and whispered the words aloud until they became familiar. The book became his secret companion, his doorway to a world he had never known. Weeks passed. The man, who turned out to be a retired schoolteacher, often returned to check on him. "What have you learned?" he would ask. The boy, nervous but eager, would recite a passage or explain a story he had managed to understand. Each time the teacher's eyes brightened. "You have a sharp mind," he said one evening, "sharper than many who sit comfortably in classrooms. Don't waste it. Knowledge can open doors you cannot yet imagine." Those words planted themselves deep in the boy's heart. For years he had been told he was useless, unwanted, cursed. But here was someone who saw not a burden but potential. The teacher began giving him small lessons, a few words of writing, a math problem, a history story. The boy devoured it all, memorizing, practicing, and teaching himself long after the lessons ended. The villagers noticed the change. They saw him reading by candlelight, heard him muttering lessons to himself. Some scoffed, laughing. "An orphan with a book? He'll never be more than a beggar." But others began to wonder. There was something about his determination, something unshakable in the way he clung to learning as though his very life depended on it. And in truth, it did. One afternoon, a wealthy merchant came to the village market. He struggled with a calculation, trying to tally his sales. The orphan, standing nearby, hesitated before stepping forward. "Sir, may I help?" he asked. The merchant frowned, ready to dismiss him. But the boy quickly picked up a stick and wrote the calculation in the dirt. Numbers flowed easily from his mind, and within moments he had the answer. The merchant stared, surprised. "Where did you learn this?" The boy simply pointed to the teacher across the square. The merchant nodded slowly. For the first time, the boy's intelligence had been seen not as an oddity, but as a skill. That night, lying beneath the stars, he felt something he had never truly felt before. Hope. Not the fragile hope of surviving one more day, but a bold hope. The hope of a future. He whispered to himself, "I am not useless. I am not cursed. I am more than what they say I am." The gift of one book, the guidance of one teacher had lit a fire inside him. A fire that could not be extinguished by hunger, by insults, or even by loneliness. It seemed so small at the time. A book handed to a boy with nothing. A few lessons given to a child everyone had ignored. But what no one realized was that this single act of recognition would change everything. Because inside that boy lived a storm waiting to be unleashed. And this was only the beginning. The gift of a book and the belief of a mentor had lit a flame in the orphan's soul. But flames, if left unattended, can flicker out. He knew this. So he guarded it fiercely, feeding it with every ounce of determination he had. His climb was just beginning. A climb not of mountains, but of the towering walls society had built to keep boys like him on the ground. Every night, after long hours of work, he would drag his weary body to the corner of the street, where a single flickering lamp buzzed against the darkness, while others slept in warm beds. He sat cross-legged on the hard ground, book in hand, lips moving as he repeated words he barely understood but refused to let defeat him. Passers-by sometimes mocked him. "Look at the orphan, pretending to be a scholar." "Books won't feed you, boy." He ignored them. He had endured worse. Insults could not starve the hunger inside him, the hunger for knowledge. Even when the lamp sputtered and went dark, he refused to stop. He traced words in the dirt by moonlight, whispering lessons until his eyes grew heavy. By day, he worked, some mornings at the market carrying sacks, other days sweeping, sometimes mending shoes or scrubbing floors. No task was beneath him, for each coin earned was another chance to buy a candle, a scrap of paper, or a used pencil. But when the sun set, his world transformed. He was no longer the ragged orphan of the village. In those quiet hours of study, he became a seeker, a builder, a dreamer. His mentor, the retired teacher, noticed his progress. The boy's reading grew smoother, his writing sharper, his memory quicker. Where others saw a poor orphan, the teacher saw a mind that refused to bend. Yet the climb was never easy. Many times he stumbled. One evening he tried to solve a math problem but got it wrong again and again. Frustrated, he slammed the book shut and buried his face in his hands. "Maybe they're right," he whispered. "Maybe I'll never be more than this." But then something within him, the same fire that had carried him through hunger and loneliness, rose up. He picked the book back up, wiped his tears, and tried again. And when he finally solved the problem, he smiled through his exhaustion. Failure, he realized, was not the end. It was simply the next step in the climb. Slowly, whispers began spreading in the village. The boy who once begged for crumbs was now solving sums, reciting stories, and speaking with a confidence that unsettled those who had once mocked him. Some villagers sneered. "He's wasting his time. No orphan has ever risen above his station." But others began to admire him. Mothers pointed him out to their children. Look at that boy. He has nothing, yet he studies harder than anyone. The same people who once dismissed him now watched with curiosity, sensing that something about him was different. One day, while helping a carpenter, he noticed a tool was poorly designed. Without hesitation, he suggested a small adjustment. A sharper angle here, a stronger joint there. The carpenter tried it, and to his surprise, the tool worked better than before. Another time, he organized the younger children of the village, teaching them the letters and numbers he had learned. He had no chalkboard, no classroom, only a stick in the dirt beneath their feet. Yet his passion made the children listen, and soon they were repeating lessons with laughter and excitement. It was a small thing, but in that moment, a new possibility revealed itself. Leadership. He wasn't just learning for himself. He was becoming a light for others. His mentor noticed the shift and said one evening, "You are no longer climbing for yourself alone. Others are beginning to follow you, whether you realize it or not. This is the mark of greatness. Not what you achieve alone, but how many rise because of you." The boy's heart pounded. Greatness? Could that really be possible for an unwanted orphan? Still, the climb demanded sacrifice. There were nights when hunger gnawed so fiercely he could hardly focus. Days when his body ached from labor so much that lifting a book seemed impossible. But he pressed on. When one lesson ended, he searched for another. When one book was finished, he begged for scraps of paper to copy passages, filling them with his handwriting. When resources ran out, he carved knowledge into his memory. Every step forward was a victory. Every word learned, every problem solved, was proof that the world's rejection could not define him. He had nothing, no family, no wealth, no safety. Yet he carried within him a will stronger than iron. Each night under that flickering lamp, each day of sweat and struggle, was another stone in the ladder he was building for himself. What no one realized was that this boy, once mocked, forgotten, and left behind, was climbing toward a destiny that would one day shake the very foundations of the world. For greatness does not appear overnight. It is carved step by painful step by those who refuse to stop climbing. Years passed. The boy who once sat alone under a street lamp scribbling on scraps of paper was no longer a child. He had grown taller, his frame lean from years of work and hunger, yet his eyes burned brighter than ever. Sharp, focused, relentless. The climb had not been easy, but every hardship had carved him into someone different, stronger, wiser, unstoppable. And then, one day the world finally began to notice. The town square buzzed with unusual excitement. A notice had been pinned up on the board, an announcement from the district capital. A scholarship competition was being held, open to anyone who could pass the written exam and interview. The prize? A full education in the city, paid for in full. For most villagers, it was just another piece of paper, but for him it was a lifeline. His heart raced as he read the words again and again. This was it, the door he had been waiting for. Of course, others laughed when he spoke of it. You, an orphan competing against city children? Impossible. You don't even have proper clothes. They'll laugh you out of the room. But the boy had stopped listening to such voices long ago. He had built armor from their insults. Every night leading up to the exam, he doubled his efforts. He revised until his vision blurred, recited facts until his throat burned, solved problems until his fingers cramped. His mentor guided him as best he could, offering old notes, advice, and encouragement. But it wasn't just the studying, it was the will. He remembered nights of hunger, mornings of rejection, days of labor under the sun. Compared to those battles, this exam was just another climb. When the day finally came, he dressed in the cleanest shirt he owned, patched and faded, but neat. His shoes were worn thin, but his spirit was unshakable. The city's examination hall was unlike anything he had ever seen. Tall pillars, wide doors, and rows of desks filled with students from wealthy families. They arrived in polished uniforms, carrying expensive pens and bags. He felt their eyes on him, their whispers of mockery. But when the papers were handed out, the world around him disappeared. His hand flew across the page. Numbers, words, logic, essays. Everything he had studied poured out like water breaking through a dam. Hours passed, and when the final bell rang, he leaned back in his chair, exhausted but certain. He had given everything. Weeks later, the results were announced in the town square. Villagers crowded around as the names were read aloud. At first, no one believed it. Then the truth echoed through the air like a thunderclap. His name had been called. The orphan. The boy nobody wanted. The one who studied by candlelight. He had won the scholarship. For a moment, silence. And then whispers spread like wildfire. Did you hear? It's him. The orphan? How is that possible? Maybe he's not so useless after all. For the first time in his life, people looked at him not with pity but with awe. With the scholarship came a train ticket to the city. As he boarded, villagers who once turned him away now came to shake his hand, offering awkward smiles and half-hearted blessings. Some tried to claim they had always believed in him. He knew better, but he didn't hold on to their hypocrisy. His focus was elsewhere, on the road ahead. The city was a whirlwind of sights and sounds, tall buildings, endless crowds, and opportunities that stretched farther than he could imagine. He studied harder than ever, surrounded by peers who had grown up with every advantage. At first he felt out of place like a weed among roses, but then the professors noticed. His work stood out. His answers were sharp, his ideas original. He didn't just memorize, and he created, he solved, he imagined. Slowly, his name began to spread. It came one evening during a science fair. Students from across the district presented projects, many polished and well-funded. And there he was, with nothing more than recycled scraps and ingenuity. His project was simple but brilliant. A device that conserved water for households, designed from discarded materials. Judges gathered around, impressed. "Who built this?" they asked. When he stepped forward, they blinked in surprise. He had no sponsors, no wealthy family, no powerful name. Just determination. But that night he walked away with the first-place ribbon. Newspapers carried his picture. His name began to circulate beyond the city. For the first time he tasted recognition, not as an orphan but as a mind to be respected. News traveled fast. Back in the village, the people who once spat at him now spoke his name with pride. Mothers told their children, "Study hard, or you'll be left behind like he once was." Some of the same bullies who mocked him as a child now lowered their heads in shame when they heard of his success. The whispers had changed. Where once they said, "He'll never amount to anything," now they said, "Perhaps he will make us proud one day." The breakthrough was only the beginning. Scholarships led to more opportunities. Competitions became stepping stones. Articles were written about the orphan boy who had risen from the streets. Invitations arrived, conferences, debates, and meetings with leaders. At every stage he carried himself with humility. But inside, he knew. This was the result of years of pain, struggle, and resilience. He had climbed alone, step by painful step, and now the summit was coming into view. They had abandoned him, mocked him, forgotten him. Yet now the same world that once spat on his name could not stop speaking it. His breakthrough was not luck nor charity. It was forged from hunger, sweat, and an unshakable will. The orphan no one wanted had become the young man everyone watched. And little did they know this was only the beginning, for his climb was far from over. The world was about to witness just how high he could rise. The boy who once slept on the cold ground with nothing but torn clothes to shield him from the night was no longer just a name whispered in a village. His story had begun to stretch far beyond the fields he once worked, beyond the markets where people had mocked him, beyond even the city where he had earned his first victories. Now, the world itself was starting to take notice. One morning, newspapers across the country carried his photograph. The headline read, "His story spread like wildfire." Journalists called him a symbol of hope, a modern-day miracle, the face of determination. People who had never met him felt inspired. They clipped his story, shared it in schools, and whispered his name in households far away. Soon, it wasn't just national attention. International reporters began to ask, "Who is this young man? And how did he rise from the dust of poverty to the heights of success?" He published research that solved problems affecting not only his community, but entire regions. He spoke at conferences where world leaders listened in silence, hanging on his every word. He created programs to help poor children like himself, ensuring that no child would ever be rejected the way he once. Awards followed, first regional, then national, and finally international recognition. His name appeared on prestigious lists. Invitations came from universities, presidents, and even global organizations. The boy who had once been unwanted was now impossible to ignore. One unforgettable evening, he stood in front of thousands at a world summit. Cameras flashed, lights glared, and millions watched on television. His voice carried across continents as he told his story. I was once abandoned, mocked, forgotten. But I learned something. Where you start does not decide where you finish. Every child, no matter how poor or unwanted, carries greatness within them. The audience erupted in applause. Some wept openly, touched by the raw power of his journey. Leaders stood and clapped, humbled by the strength of a boy who had risen without wealth, without privilege, without support, only with determination. Back in the village, people crowded around small televisions and radios to watch him speak. They could hardly believe their eyes. The same boy they had turned away from their doors now appeared on the world stage, celebrated as a leader and a visionary. Shame hung heavy in the air. Those who once called him useless now lowered their heads. Some whispered regrets, others tried to take credit. I gave him food once, and he stayed at my cousin's house once. But deep inside, they knew the truth. They had abandoned him, and yet he had become the pride of the world. Fame did not change him. Instead, he used his platform to lift others. He built schools in poor villages. He funded scholarships for orphans. He set up health clinics where none existed. And when reporters asked why, he answered simply, "Because I know what it feels like to be forgotten. And I refuse to let another child live that story." His humility touched people even more than his achievements. He wasn't just a star. He was a servant leader, someone whose greatness lay not only in success, but in compassion. The orphan who became the world's teacher. Proof that poverty cannot kill dreams. A hero born from rejection. Social media exploded with his speeches and photographs. Children painted his picture on walls. Teachers used his journey as a lesson in classrooms. Songs and poems were written in his honor, everywhere. People whispered, "If he could rise, maybe we can too." Years later, he stood on the grandest stage yet, an award ceremony broadcast across the globe. Dressed in a simple suit, he received a medal from a world leader. The hall filled with thunderous applause as the announcer declared, "This is a man who proves that no life is too small, no beginning too broken, and no child too forgotten to rise and change the world." As cameras zoomed in, the world saw his eyes glisten with tears, not because of the award itself, but because he remembered the boy he once was. Cold, hungry, unwanted. And he realized that boy had never truly disappeared. He carried him inside as a reminder of why he fought, why he climbed, why he gave back. He was the orphan nobody wanted, the child everyone forgot. Yet today his name is written in history. His voice heard across nations, his actions shaping the future. The world celebrates him now. But what they do not see are the nights of hunger, the years of pain, the endless rejections that forged his fire. This is not just the story of one boy. It is proof that even the most forgotten among us can rise to lead, to inspire, to change the world itself. The story that began with abandonment and rejection now closes with a legacy too great to ignore. The boy who once wandered the streets with no one to call his own had grown into a man celebrated across nations. He was no longer the child who watched other orphans get chosen while he remained behind. He was no longer the hungry teenager mocked by villagers. He was no longer the forgotten name. He had become unforgettable. He grew up unwanted, but became unforgettable. The orphan they ignored shocked the whole world, not with anger, not with revenge, but with greatness. His strength was not in bitterness, but in the fire of hope. His answer to rejection was not hatred, but transformation. And in that choice, he rewrote his destiny. The audience sees the contrast clearly. The same boy who once had nothing now gave everything to others. Where people had once turned their backs, he now opened his arms to those still suffering. His life had become a bridge between pain and possibility. Greatness, the narrator reminds us, often begins in the most broken places. From shattered beginnings can rise unshakable strength. From rejection can grow resilience. From being forgotten can come a voice that the whole world remembers. His life proved that circumstance is not a prison, that pain is not permanent, that the harshest wounds can become the deepest sources of power. And perhaps, most importantly, that kindness and vision can grow in even the harshest soil. In the end, people who once dismissed him learned the greatest lesson of all. They had underestimated the value of a single human life. The boy they thought was worthless had become priceless to millions. His story was no longer just his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were not enough. To every child who ever felt unwanted. To every dreamer who had been laughed at. Through him they discovered a simple but eternal truth. Rejection cannot stop destiny, unless you let it.